Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid. Head over to ac55id.com to check out the fastest growing electronic music marketplace. You can buy music there, you can sell music as an artist or as a label, you can stream music and you can stream podcasts, including this one. Perhaps most excitingly though, you can press vinyl. They've got their own pressing plant and they can fulfill orders on demand. That is pretty amazing. So this is a really exciting platform that I use myself, and the other great thing about them is they're supporting this show. So head over to ac55id.com to check them out.
Brought to you by AC55ID.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, on the show this week, we have someone who has been on our list for literally years. You may be aware that we used to be an audio-only podcast called the Not a Diving Podcast, which ran for 157 episodes. I keep saying this, but it's still true. 3 years of that show. And Jane Fitz was on our list, I think, at the start, the very first list of guests that we drew up for that show. But for various different reasons, it didn't happen. But that's okay, because she's here now on a full video episode of Music Not Diving. So great to have her on. She is, I think, a DJ's DJ, right? I hate that term usually, but I think it's true when it comes to her. She is someone who I think just is massively respected and has been respected for a long time now, having broken through, I suppose, relatively late in her career. As she often says in interviews, she did the rounds of playing many shows for 100 quid a time. And, you know, that probably stands you in good stead as a DJ, probably more so than just being parachuted in off the back of some tune you've made or something, for example. Obviously that never happens. Of course that never happens. Anyway, as I said, highly respected DJ. Everyone loves her. She's also very well respected for throwing some amazing parties, most notably Peg in the 2000s, and over the last 15 years, Night Moves. Now, I've never been to any of these parties, so I'm completely going on hearsay, but people say that they were absolutely amazing. They still kind of do Night Moves. They haven't done one for a while, but it's still essentially live. So we talk about the challenges of putting on parties right now, particularly in London, but also around the world. And, you know, the state of the scene and the kind of things we normally talk about. But Jane is a pretty cool person, and this is a really great conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. So just before we get into it, a reminder that you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/Scuba Official. There are 2 tiers there. The more expensive one gets you all of the music that we release on Hot Flash Recording. So that's a great thing to do anyway. If you don't want to subscribe, but you do want to support, then you can send us a one-off donation at scubaofficial.io/support. There is a Discord server you can join, hotflashrecordings.com/discord. All this stuff is in the show notes, by the way. There's a Spotify playlist as well that you can join, again, link in the show notes. I think that's it. Is that it? Yeah, it is it. So without further delay, let's head over to the studio and talk to Jane Fitz. Jane Fitz, welcome to the show.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm all right. Yeah, good.
Nice. We've never met before. I've just recorded one of these, if I can just draw the curtain back a little bit. I've just recorded one with someone I know really well.
Oh, really?
It's quite fun, though, I find, anyway, recording podcasts with people who I've literally know.
Total strangers.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So
at least you didn't pick me up from the street. So
that is well,
that's
I've never done that
even
before.
Better.
But nice to meet you anyway.
And you.
Absolutely. So you just come back from Canada. We were just discussing.
Yes, I just got back, literally. I was in Montreal for the weekend. So, yeah, that was cool. I played for Expose Noir, and that was a really nice party.
What's that party?
I don't know much about it, to be honest. They keep everything very mysterious and, you know, no phones and everything. It's very, it's very, like, and it's super nice production, lovely crew, great crowd, very good sound. Had a nice void sound system, nice monitors. Yeah, it was good.
Montreal?
Good time. Yeah. But I only played one gig.
Okay.
Try to only...
And you were saying off camera, this is the one night of the year or something, they have 24-hour licenses?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether it's just in Montreal or whether it's Canada-wide or how it works. I don't know, or Quebec-wide, I don't know. But yeah, they had a night where, I think it was called White Night or Black Night or something like that. And everybody can apply for 24-hour licenses. So there were a bunch of 24-hour parties going on. Nice. And I played on the Sunday night.
Good. Mm-hmm. Do you go over to North America much?
I don't really. I used to when I had a visa.
By the way, they're so expensive now to get. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I was quoted $10,000 for a 3-year O1.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I was due. I did have a US visa, and then I was due to. It was due for renewal around the time of the pandemic, and I was like, am I going to give 4 or 5 grand to a lawyer in America? Exactly. Am I going to keep that money for myself? No, I think I might need it. And then, so yeah, I just don't. I play more in South America actually, and yeah. So if I'm going to cross the Atlantic, I'd rather go where the weather's going to be guaranteed good.
It's definitely not guaranteed in Canada.
Yeah.
Where's good in South America these days? I haven't been down there for ages actually.
Yeah, lots of places. Yeah. I mean, I was in a relationship with somebody in Rio for a few years, so I was going to Rio a lot, and then I've played in Sao Paulo, which was, I mean, for me, South America is, obviously it's many different countries, but they're all, for me, I see everything is similar in a vibe. So when you go to the party seems to be more about the party than anything else. And that means that when you get there, everybody's in good spirits. So that's one thing I've noticed from top to bottom, really, is that there's always this fantastic vibe of people just being locked into the party. So maybe less train spottery or...
I was going to say, yeah.
DJs hanging around,
the vibe, as opposed to what? As opposed to the music, as opposed to...
Yeah, as opposed to people being there purely to see you.
Right.
As it, you know, they might not know who I am or whatever. So, but I do find that people kind of support a party much more than they do it in other places where people support the DJ or the lineup. So yeah, that's my interpretation of the experiences that I've had in. But there's lots of different scenes, you know. Maybe less so in Uruguay. That seems to be a bit more focused and a bit more locked in. But yeah, in other places, it seems to be more about the party. And I like that because people then, they don't have any expectations and they're up for a good time. So.
Right. I mean, this is in common with your parties, which I've got down on my long list of notes to talk about. I've got way more notes than I usually have.
Get your notes out.
Yeah, right. But actually, let's not start there. I actually wanted to start... Because I gave you a list of things that you asked me for a list of things, which I don't normally do actually, but in this case, I'm making an exception. What I was going to ask you about the term underground, because in a previous interview of yours, or normally I prepare for these by just reading past interviews, and you talked about the term underground and how it was possibly a bit out of date and sort of irrelevant now. And I've asked people this before, and people struggle to define underground as a thing anyway. So what is it? What does it mean to you anyway? Or what did it mean to you when it was a thing?
Well, you can't look at underground without looking at overground. So you have to find the ground, wherever that is. And I think for many, many years, the ground and what was under it was always to do with what was visible, you know, because everything underground you can't see, you know. So that's like the real literal term of underground. So I would say it's all the stuff you can't see still. But what is that? Because nowadays you can see everything, you know, everything is broadcastable within seconds and everything is recordable within seconds. So for something to be underground and not seen, but still existing is so much harder. So that for me, there are scenes that are coexisting in the world without that kind of exposure or without being seen, but it's so much harder to find them now and so much harder to... I don't know, even if you're intending to stay underground, for people to not just turn up and start filming you anyway. So I think, you know, and then it's out there and then it's exposed. So yeah, I think it's way harder and almost, I don't know, has it gone? Is it dead? Possibly. I don't know. It's much, much harder to be underground now just because purely everything is exposed.
Sure. I mean, this is simultaneously true for music, but also for, I suppose, the culture around it. Yeah,
anything.
Right. Yeah, sure.
For anything. Underground culture used to be, I mean, you know, if we go back to 70s, 80s, 90s, when youth culture really had a boom, things could be underground easily because we didn't have the means or the handy media to record those things. So things could grow in secret, in the dark, very easily, because people weren't traveling as much. We didn't have cheaper airlines, you know, we didn't have the money to do that, or we didn't have the videos to do that, or the internet to do that. All of those things were easily able to grow away in the dark and be underground and maintain some kind of underground feel and exist for years like that. You know, underground scenes could exist for years. Now it's impossible.
Sure.
So, you know, if anybody is doing something underground, I don't even want to know about it because, you know, that's great if I don't know because that means they're succeeding at being underground.
Sure. I mean, I suppose so what this means is that things previously could develop without a kind of spotlight on them, right? And often in an extremely positive way, right? Because I mean, if something is in its infancy, then quite often it doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't deserve a spotlight on it, you know? So what does this mean for music then today? I mean, like, can you I mean, your thoughts on that?
We could always say that every person making music in their bedrooms is the underground right now, you know?
Right.
We could say that if they're not shouting about it, or if they're not putting themselves on media or SoundCloud or whatever, you know? If somebody's really just cracking on, doing their thing, maybe they've got their friends and they're doing it too. Maybe that's what we call an underground scene now. But it's a micro scene, you know. Underground is probably now not joined up, you know. So it's probably individual micro scenes occurring in little places.
That's interesting. Yeah, one of the things we talked about actually on the audio version of the podcast, the previous incarnation of the podcast, was the way local scenes don't really happen in the same way anymore. I suppose is part of the same sort of thing. And when music styles develop, it's often different people in different places sending tunes to each other and communicating online. But that's a slightly different relationship, isn't it?
I mean, look, because of technology and just progress in the way that things happen. For example, I mentioned like flights being cheaper and more accessible for people. You know, nothing is ever going to be like it was. So we have to underground has to become something else and be appropriate as a term for something in today's society. So I know that you could maybe call a global scene where, and I know this because I experienced it, DJs in, I don't know, the other side of the world and this part of the world and another part of the world, and they all join up and maybe they see each other once a year at a festival somewhere or something. You know, maybe that creates an underground scene. And it's underground because, it's not getting as much shine or as much hype as other scenes, or they're just not shouting about it like maybe other scenes are. So, you could call that the global, you know, a global underground now, or a underground, an underground. But, we're kind of limited by the fact that, everybody has access to broadcasting from, you know, their own bed. You know, you can literally lay in bed with your laptop, make music, and broadcast it. You know, and have a following without getting up. So because of that, you have to work within what you've got. But I think it's possible. There's lots of people that I know who refuse to be on social media, so they're not putting their output or any of their creativity in a kind of broadcast way, in a globally broadcast way that somebody just could find, you know. They don't even have to shout about it, but if you're not putting something on social media, how's somebody going to find you now? That's the only way to stay underground, is to
not be on social media.
Not shout.
Not film.
But of course other people will film you and other people will
Right. No, I mean
keep the underground to yourself now.
Totally. I mean, I was listening to your appearance on the DJ History podcast with Bill. Bill's been on this show too. I was fascinated by your discussion of obscure Italian deep house records, I thought I knew a bit about deep house, but I didn't know any of those tunes. And you know that developed in such a I mean an underground way, but in a way which was
underground,
kind
and
of
that was a huge...
unsullied by outside attention, right?
Yes.
And is that spotlight inherently corrupting, if I can put it like that? Is it necessarily bad, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you wanted to be, I just think it's faster. I just think it's sped everything up. You know, if you wanted to be a punk in 1975, 1976, and then you heard about it through standard media, which was available then, which is the newspaper or the pop charts or radio maybe, you would maybe find that out a year later or whatever, and then you wanted to be part of that underground and do your own scene and start your own scene. And that's how things happened in, you know, Germany or Chile or wherever you were in the world. Things just took longer to filter through. So it's the same process of finding stuff out, but it's just really instant now. That's the thing. It's not, you know, even how I developed as a DJ without anybody knowing who I was for years, I was able to do it because I didn't have to shout. There was no media to shout on, you know, so it was easy to kind of do everything secretly or underground and people not know about you because there was nothing and I had no desire to shout about myself. So it was easy to do that. And now it's almost impossible to do that.
Well, I think people, certain people are able to not become famous DJs. But
Yeah, of course.
But it's a slightly different thing, though, isn't it? Yeah, because what the scene that people are operating in now, is just like it's completely different in nature. But I suppose there must be people now. There must be talented young DJs who aren't at all known by anyone, who are developing a style.
I hope so.
I hope so too. This is
I really hope so.
I'm putting a kind of like a positive spin on this, but you would. I mean, that must be happening, right? Because just because of the fact there are so many people.
Yeah,
doing
but I
it
mean,
now.
that for me, that's like what you just mentioned, Italy. I mean, those things develop not because people wanted to be famous, but because they wanted to have a great time, and so. There was a whole movement across Tuscany at that time, in the early 90s, of different towns, from the coast, from Livorno and Porto Pisa to Florence to, I don't know, further south, going towards Umbria or whatever. That you had different areas where people would meet and go to a club and then, I hear this DJ. Oh, these DJs are from here. Okay, we're friends. Right, we're going to make tapes. You buy the tapes here. Okay, then we start making the records. Those scenes just naturally developed because people wanted to have a good time and they loved music. And this is a time, and unfortunately I don't feel this is the time now, but people's relationships with music was much undisturbed. Right. You had music, you had that was your love for it, and you found every way you can to interact with it. Whereas now music doesn't tend to be the focus for a lot of things. It's almost like the background. It's less of the drive. Yeah. So this is at that time, the needs of the people and needs of the youth and what was available to them created these scenes, and they created naturally by a need to find your tribe, find your like-minded musical cohorts or whatever, and that's how it grew. Whereas now I think people have so much more choice that narrative can't almost exist for everybody, because if your only medium for getting music was on records, or hearing it was in a club or on the radio or in the car or whatever, then everybody had the same path. Right. So you either chose music or you didn't. Right. Whereas now you have so many different ways to get into things: gaming, videos, social media, clubs. Whatever is your choice, your relationship to music can take so many different directions now. So it's much harder, I think, for people to find the people who feel the same way that you do about something. Right. We all get to the same point, but in a different way.
The interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah, and I think that's why the scenes get diluted, because they're not as they're not. It's not just a straight line anymore. It's not a straight line to music. Now there's so many different angles you could be getting it. You don't, even the way that you consume music, there's so many choices of, you can buy a record, you can go to Spotify, you can download it, your friend can give you a CD, whatever it is. There's now multiple ways to get to the same point. And obviously those ways are never going to be the same. So it's harder for people to kind of synchronize, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to Italy.
So do I.
Yeah, exactly. Could be there now, actually. What you said about music being less important absolutely resonates. I've said a number of times on the show recently that music seems to be a prerequisite still in the music scene, but no longer, weirdly, the primary focus. Yeah. Which is that...
It's heartbreaking. For me, it's heartbreaking.
But you recognise that.
And of course I see it all the time. I mean, but I'm lucky. I know that I'm lucky, because where I go, I see people who are desperately into music, desperately into collecting music on digital vinyl, however they want to collect it, going to gigs. I get to interact with people who love music. But I see that there's plenty of places, or plenty of, ways that people are not interacting with music as their first choice. I see videos just like everybody else of parties, and no one cares really about, no one's listening, It's all visually stimulated now. Everything's about the visual. Okay. It's not about, you can't be in a dark room listening to just music, because that's almost not enough for people.
Sure. Let me ask you, to what extent has that always been the case? Because there was always some element of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there was always a spectacle. I mean, early raves, going around the M25, you'd always have your bouncy castles and all these kind of, bumper cars and all that stuff. So, yeah, there's always been stuff to keep you occupied in other ways. I mean, when the Ministry started, there was a cinema in one room, So there's always been this kind of other element, but a club is not a rock show. it's a club,
Right.
you know, it's a dark room. And I think obviously I think all of this is to say this is you could chart it with the rise of festivals, which are daytime, which are much more visual, which is all about, and at night it's all about the light and how it looks and everything. So people have developed a vocabulary and an understanding of the language of visuals being there with the music. And so for some people, once they've learned that language, they are choosing that language more. So they want to be visually stimulated. Whereas, you know, I'm in my 50s. When I was going out, there was no visual stimulation. It was just a dark. You went to a club, you know, and that was it. So yeah, things have just evolved, and now, as with everything else, there's just way more choice. Sure. So people, like I say, they haven't got this pure kind of artery between music and the heart anymore. It comes from so many different ways. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's really upsetting because I only ever went out when I first started going out. I was like 15, which was 1988, I think.
Yep.
I was 15,
it's
so
I did start going out.
Yeah, but I didn't go to any raves because I was too young. You know, I was still too young then. But I did go to parties where those DJs were playing for like younger people kind of thing. So I went to those things.
Oh, under 18s raves?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, there were loads where I lived.
Okay, yeah. Dave Clark told me about going to under 18s.
Yeah, under 18s were like, for me, that was the killer. It would be like Wednesday night in Romford, the Monday night in Dagenham. It was like.
Are you from Essex then, really?
I'm from Barking. So, yeah. So, my very first rave, if you like, was an under 18s rave on a Monday night in the back of a pub called the Robin Hood, which is now a Lidl, in Dagenham. Okay. And the DJs playing there were like the guys who were playing at Rain Dance or whatever.
Right,
Rain Dance
like LSD or something.
I don't remember, but I know that they would do that on a Monday. So, and it would just be full of 15-year-olds going crazy, you know. So and in fact that started before Acid House. So maybe it was 87, you know, because maybe I was 14, because I remember the music changing. When I first started going out, it was mainly soul, rare groove, and a bit of early hip hop and stuff. So yeah, then it kind of changed. So I saw that all come in. But yeah, for me, music, that's why I was out. I wasn't out to meet people. I wasn't out to socialise. I definitely wasn't doing drugs at 14 because no one had heard of any, you know, other than a bit of pufferwood, no one had heard of any drugs then. So I was only out for the music, and that was always my drive. The thing that got me out of the house was I wanted to hear music. So as somebody who comes from that direction, I do find it heartbreaking, but I'm just being nostalgic, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, do you think that the current generation of young people, that sounds terrible, you know what I mean? People who are age, I don't know, 18. Yeah, exactly. Do you think they're intimidated by dark places, dark rooms? I mean, like, there's always talk about like,
gosh,
you know,
I hope so.
Kids being, you know, plagued by anxiety and mental health problems, and actually my memories of going to clubs for the first time was they're quite intimidating places, right? They could be quite, you know, I certainly remember going to, you know, the early jungle raves that I went to were, you know, frankly terrifying, but like you get used to it, and that's kind of like part of the fun, right? Do you think there is something to that? Do you think?
I honestly don't know, because, you know, I have a guy who works for me, he's 25, so I guess he's not even that young anymore, you know. So, but I know his crew, and they love to party, and for me, I see them as like a little crew of hope, because I can see that they're all into records. They go out because they want to be with their mates, number one. They just want to have a party and stuff. So I know that there's a purity there, in exactly the kind of motivations that I had at that age, of wanting to go out, get high, go and see my friends, listen to music, play my records at home and afters or whatever. You know, they're living the life that I lived. So I know that there's some kind of authenticity there, but I know for some people that just doesn't happen. Right. And I don't know why, but I'm not that connected to 18-year-olds, 19-years-olds. I don't know.
I mean, there's no reason why
you know. I don't have kids, so I don't. You know, I really don't know. So I just kind of feel. I would hope that the people who love music, that it still means a lot for them. And another thing is, you know, when I was growing up, the indie scene was really massive. Okay, so I went to just as many gigs as I did clubs, and go and see bands, and I always saw much more kind of passion with the people who came via rock, you know, and the people who came via indie, and you could see that because kids were way more tribal in what they had what they wore, how their hair was cut, what albums they would have coming out of a plastic bag of Alprice.
Being identified with being a fan of a band is much more a thing, right? And that was never the case when you were a fan.
But that was always about me. That's definitely music driven, and I don't go to see that kind of music anymore. I go to concerts, but I don't go to smashing indie bands anymore, moshing or whatever. And so I'm pretty sure that students or whoever is the demographic for that, they are probably still going for the music. I doubt.
Right.
But I don't know.
You mentioned, a club isn't a rock show, a rave isn't a rock show primarily. Yeah. I mean, that you were referring, I think, to the visual side of it there. But
for the whole spectacle.
Sure, but I mean, the other difference is that when you go to a rock show, you're paying to see a band, right? You're paying to see a very specific act. And I think that one of the other things which has happened is that has seeped into dance music quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I saw DVS1 do an interview about this, and he was saying exactly the same thing, that because of festivals, because DJs started appearing at festivals, they had to start appearing like they were a band because they were
selling tickets. Yeah.
But also because that was the technical side of it. Right. If you're at a festival, you can't put a DJ in a corner where no one can see them. They're going to be like, what where is the beat? So there's an element of staging that has then seeped through. I get upset if I go to a club and they've put me on a stage. That I know. I go ballistic, to be honest. I really, because I always say, please don't do it, because I don't want people looking at my nose when I'm DJing. Do you know what I mean? Right. It's like that's what's the joy in seeing a 50-year-old woman looking up her nose like that? It's not
the table.
It's no fun, is it? Stick me on the floor, please. Stick me in front of the stage. Yeah. So
it's not. I mean, because as much as anything else, it's just not a good spectacle. Like if you want to create a spectacle, that's the
do something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of any kind of spectacle when it comes to DJing. I don't mind, I really, really kind of am envious. I have my own sort of nostalgic envy towards being able to, for Larry Levan being able to play really, really high up in the gods at the garage and just be able to see the entire floor, but no one could see him. That in a way is almost that taking the DJ almost.
I never liked being in that situation though. I mean, as a DJ, I played a few clubs. Which are like that. There was actually, I can't remember the name of it. There was a club in New York which opened, must have been about 15 years ago, and they specifically tried to do that. Oh, yeah. And you're right up in the gods and actually, I found like I want to be on floor level. Yeah, that's where I want to be.
That's the ideal.
Right.
I was always very fascinated to think to be able to see a dance floor and to command a dance floor from that high up that's a dream, because no one's looking for the DJ then.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
And I like that. And you can watch everybody.
That's the platonic ideal of the
I once DJ'd for World Unknown in the basement of a pub in Camberwell, I think it was, and I was in a different room to the dance floor. Okay. So
just upstairs in the office.
Literally in a different room. Right. I had to keep. There was like a curtain, and I had to come out, poke my head out to see what. And actually, there was a little bit of a corridor as well, so I had to go around. And I did it once. I was like, no. So I literally played to a wall, but I could hear the party. Okay. So that's the most extreme, and that was pretty good,
Right. Okay. So let's go back to the start. So you're from Barking.
I'm from Barking.
What was growing up in Barking like?
Pretty grim, basically. Right. It was fine. I mean, it's like a suburb of London, so it's on the tube. It's not particularly inspiring a place, but it was fine. It has its ghetto parts and it has its nice parts, and the thing about growing up there, which I realised was that I had London on my doorstep. Right. So I get on a tube, one stop, I'm in E6, East Ham. So then I can be into town. So it wasn't long before I discovered the tube and going into town. And for me, going into town was going to, I don't know, go to Soho or whatever. And then I went to university in Soho. So
What was the first music you got into? Like
soul, rare groove, funk, boogie, primarily boogie, I think, because just from pirate radio and from my older brother, playing. My brother's 12 years older than me, so he would have music in the house.
That's different, yeah.
So I had lots of different things, from soft rock and heavy metal to a lot of Bowie and Queen, and then a lot of things like Chic and
what kind of heavy metal? Sorry, this is a topic I'm interested in.
Well, he was a bit more. Well, he used to like Sabbath, and he used to like things, but he was more into things like Rainbow and Rush and Styx and all these kind of sort of a bit more soft rocky kind of things. But but also Judas Priest and things. So that's what I would hear in the house. So I'd hear metal and rock, and then I'd hear a bit of reggae, like very accessible kind of third world kind of reggae, and then. Yeah, then lots of soul, like Earth, Wind and Fire, Stevie Wonder, Frida Pay. You know, all this. This was what I remember him buying and stuff. So yeah, and then on the radio, then that's what I heard, listening to, I don't know, Robbie Vincent, Peter Young, who else? Tony Monson. All these were the Graham Gold when he was on Solar. These were all the things that I heard a lot. And at that point in my life, I'd say as a kid, I was bullied quite a lot when I was in my early teens. Okay. I went to a school because I was out of the borough, so immediately you're like, you're different, you know, you don't sound like us. So that was my thing, was that I would just go and hide in my records and sit upstairs retuning to pirate radio every night of the week. I would do that. So that's how I learned about music. And then I got...
Did you play anything? Playing instruments, really?
I did actually. I played double bass when I was at school.
Really?
Yeah.
Good
I played the double bass at school.
Wow.
And the recorder, obviously, the classic.
Double basses are enormous.
Yeah. Yeah, when you had to go and do a concert, my dad would always be complaining, I've got to bring that bloody thing. How am I going to get that in the car? And So, yeah, I did that for a while. But, yeah, I started, I was playing, I had access to my dad's music centre, Sharp's music centre, and I was already making tapes when I was like 10, 11, just taping things off the radio and trying to make compilations for myself. So I was buying records from the age of 10, so I started buying at 10, and that was pocket money once a week, down to Simon's, which was like I guess a pound shop kind of vibe, but it had a concession in the corner where they used to sell records, and there was some good records in there. So, and then a record shop called Record Parlour opened in Barking, and I used to go there once a week, pay my £3.49 for my 12-inch that I could just about afford for my £5 pocket money, and I did that for forever. Do
you remember what's the first record you remember buying?
First record I bought was The Sun Goes Down by Level 42.
Okay,
it's on a 7-inch.
Nice.
First 12-inch I bought, which I remember as well, was Penny Ford Dangerous. So there you go, underground input boogie record from the West Coast, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what by that point, by 11 years old, I was already listening to lots of music on the radio, and every morning was, obviously not when you're at school, but every morning was Robbie Vincent, and he had a chat show on Radio London, and he used to play loads of sort of soul and stuff, and at the weekends him and Greg Edwards would play loads of stuff on Capital and Radio London. So that was my teaching.
I've had a couple of good conversations recently with people who are lifelong record collectors, notably Mr. G, actually, who I think he said at one point he had 70,000 records, which seems like just a ridiculously large number. But I believe your figure is about, your figure,
I don't know.
Your figure is about 12,000, is it? That's what I've read anyway.
Right, okay, so I actually don't know. And also, as long as I've had records, I've sold records.
Right.
So I always get rid of things if I don't play it anymore, or don't like it anymore. I never hold on to things. And I've probably sold at least, judging by what my Discog says that I've sold, and I know how many people have come around and dug and all that kind of stuff. So I've sold at least 10,000 records in the past 15 years, just selling. But I've got 12,000 records, almost 12,000 records catalogued on my Discogs, but there's plenty of stuff I started cataloguing in 2010. Okay. Every time I bought a record, I added it and went back and added a few things. So I started doing it then. But prior to that, I wasn't adding my collection. So there's loads of gaps. There's still gaps. So I'm guessing there's at least 2,000 or 3,000 records I haven't added.
Has there ever been a period where you haven't been buying records?
Maybe a little bit when I lived in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And again, I think there was a point in the early 90s where I got really into CDs and bought tons of CDs. So there was but I was still buying records, but I don't recall. I was buying different things on CD to what I was buying on records. So I was still buying 12s. But at that point, I wasn't like, I'm DJing, you know, like
that was my question.
This is the 80s, you know.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a DJ, because that kind of thing didn't even exist. Acid House hadn't even happened, you know. So I was buying records like most people of my age were doing, because we liked the records.
Yeah.
You know, there was
and if
no
you're into
other
music, that's what you did.
Yeah, you bought records.
Yeah.
So I was accumulating, if you like. I was always buying records when I wasn't buying records. So yeah, maybe a period in the mid 80s when I was in my teens, and then when I lived in Hong Kong, I was still buying records, but it was harder to buy records because there was kind of a lack of record shops. But I still managed to buy records, or I'd come back. I went to New York and bought a load of records. Went to England and bought a load of records during that time. That's when I really started DJing. So
so the question was going to be: since you've been playing out regularly, have you exclusively bought records to play?
Yeah, I buy. I think this is why I have this turnover. I always have this turnover, because I do sometimes buy things to play, and then after maybe a year, I'm like, I don't really want to play that anymore. So then, you know, I don't have that emotional connection to a record. But mostly, I'm buying it because I love it. And you know, I never stopped buying records because I just didn't see the point. You know, it never occurred to me to go to another format. So it just never did. And then when it did occur to me, I was like, oh, it's a bit late. You know, I've got way too much to upload now, so fuck it, I'll just carry on.
Can you pin down what's so great about vinyl?
I don't know. There's something for me, there was like, I had different, if I think back to when I first started buying records and my personal attachment to a record. So say I'm 14 years old, I've just got the tube into town, I've gone around the record shops. At the time it would have been probably Soul Jazz, that used to be on Ingestra Place before it moved to Sounds of the Universe. Where else did I go? Let me see, maybe just Reckless and the Video Exchange. Those were my spots really when I was really young and first buying records and didn't have much money. And I remember just getting, like, coming home on the tube or on the bus, if I got the 15 or whatever, or got the tube, having my record, looking at my record. That's all my money for the week's gone into that. Reading the cover, reading everything on that record, you know, taking it apart, reading all the lyrics to all the songs, whatever. And that part of me, that interest is still there. You know, I still get that same buzz especially if a record's sealed, open it, you know.
So good,
It's just such a great feeling.
It's just amazing.
When you pop that, pop it on your leg, pop it. That, for me, it never goes. And I'm really happy that I still get the same buzz from that. I'm sure some people get that from opening a cream egg or something, you know, like the same thing, you know. But for me, it's like opening a record. It's like, wow, it's still really exciting. And then the fact that I've got to my age, so 40 odd years of buying records, and I still feel like that means it's never going to go away, you know? So why would I stop? Obviously you have different arguments now about records, but now I do buy new records now, but I find it harder to find things for my sound, although I still commit to buying new records. But now I'm buying old records. So even that thing of like, oh, you shouldn't buy records because it's, you know, it's for the environment, it's really bad. Or it's like, well, I'm just recycling because I'm just buying old, you know. So most of the records I buy are old now. But I don't think.
Let me ask you about that. Because obviously, lots of music doesn't come out on vinyl anymore. How frustrating is that? And because do you just play? Do you ever play?
I never play digital.
Sticks? No,
I've tried, but I can't get into a flow. Like I remember about 8 years ago or 7 years ago, I went to Australia. And I really was like, I can't take a massive record bag. And I had some really long sets. So I was like, right, I'm going to make it special to play some digital. And that was probably the only time I ever did it. But subsequently, I just rarely do it. Even though I still get sent music or whatever, I just find it much easier with a record bag. And I think I get booked for places where people don't expect me to do anything else. So finally, finally.
Well, it's become a thing now almost, hasn't it? It's almost like I'm a vinyl-only DJ, which I
would never say that about myself.
No, I know you wouldn't. But people think about it like that. They do.
I also have this thing. It's like you can only be a DJ if you play discs, right? So everybody else is a USB-J. They're not.
That's technically true. And
that's fine. You know, I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but they are different, and you should look at them as different things. You know, it's like if you're a tennis player and you're a ping pong player, yeah, it's kind of the same, but it isn't the same. You're using different stuff.
I know,
so it's
I know
not
which
the
one
same.
you're saying is tennis there and which one is ping pong.
No.
I saw there was something came up on Instagram yesterday. I forget who it was. It was a DJ I'd never heard of actually. And he was demonstrating how you play a record backwards with your finger and how you look at the light. Mm-hmm. And it's just like thousands of comments of people going, wow, dude, just amazing. Like,
I mean, I feel like that when I see someone with a CDJ looping shit. I don't even know how to use a CDJ properly, right?
Let me tell you, it's more difficult to spin a record back in time with your finger than it is to press a button. Yeah.
But I do. But I feel like, you know, we can coexist. We don't have to be. We don't. But they're not the same world. But sure. I think it's fine. I just wish people would stop trying to have arguments about it, because it's like one is one thing and one is another. You have all this technology at your fingertips. Great, do what you want with your technology and your loops and your whatever you can do with CDJs. I don't know, you know, but that's fine. Let's do that. You know, do that world.
Yep.
And I love the democratization of music that it's given for people who live, say, in South Africa or, you know, Patagonia or whatever, and they weren't ever able, they were never going to buy a record. And it was, if they did, it was going to be so prohibitively expensive. And now people can get involved and do that. So I think that's fantastic. But for me, it's just not what I want to do. I don't want to stare at a screen when I'm playing music, because everything I do, I mean, people see me mixing, sometimes I've got my eyes closed. You know what I mean? I'm really not looking at stuff. I'm all about feeling and listening and doing everything with different senses. And that's my senses is touch and hear when it comes to music.
From a musical perspective, though, how frustrating is it that stuff doesn't come out on vinyl?
If I'm not seeing it,
okay.
I don't know about
right,
it. But the other thing is as well, I mean, it's not that prohibitive, because I know plenty of friends of mine who specifically do things like buy CDs, you know, from the 90s or wherever, or even get files now from Bandcamp or whatever, which are never going to be on vinyl, and they press them. They press them onto dub plates. Yeah. You know, it's like quite a big thing. So if you want to play that format, you can still play that format. Sure. You know, and Tractor as well. I mean, I see Andy Seed still plays with discs or whatever, so he can do it, but he's playing digital. So it's not. There's just choice. There's so much different choice. You can arrange it how you want. But for me, I'm just very simple, you know. So I'm very much like I see it as like, I don't know. Your CDJ world for me is like having a really fancy car with lots of things that it can do, and I'm still on a bike, you know, and I've got my two wheels, and that's it.
I mean, almost no one uses anything like the full range of features on those CDJs anyway. Do you know what I mean? It's like almost. But
maybe they do,
nothing.
And if they do, fantastic. But I haven't got a clue what any of those things do.
Yeah,
it's like a flight deck for me. I was like, well, how do I fly this?
I mean, they've become more and more complicated, and you know, they're weird. When was your first ever DJ gig?
Gosh, I don't define DJ.
All right, when was the first time you got paid for DJing? You must remember that.
No, I don't actually. No, because it was around a period when you probably went to the pub and got 50 quid, you know, like
that's a decent fee for a set in a pub.
Yes, maybe 1991 or something like that. Playing things like soul records, playing things like I Can't Get No Sleep by Master at Work, playing, or, you know, I don't know, Cross the Tracks, things, you know, Macy and the Max, things like that. Playing a mix of that kind of stuff. So yeah, probably around when I was a student. 92, 91, 92. First proper gig mixing would have been in Hong Kong, because I couldn't mix until I moved to Hong Kong.
This is something you talked about with Bill. Yeah. So you were just sticking on tunes basically before that? It just
fade in, fade out.
Yeah.
You know? So I was doing that, and for me, they were the clubs that I was going to at that point were not house clubs, so they weren't predominantly mixing clubs. I was going to things like Dingwalls and Talking Loud and those kind of Bass Clef and those kind of things. So. Norman J at the Iceni and things, you know, they were my parties, so no one was mixing at those parties. Maybe Bob Jones, that was probably it, but I don't remember Patrick Forge or Kevin Beadle or Norman or Giles or any of them people mixing, and mixing wasn't the thing, you know. And actually, me discovering mixing was a transformative, you know, that was a thing that really happened for me. Like, whoa, this is what mixing is. So
you when you're talking to Bill, you said that you worked that out in your head before you had two turntables.
I got really upset. I think.
Was it accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, I looked at the technology. I never had access to the technology until I moved into this flat in Hong Kong where my flatmate had 2 decks. He had one Vestax and one Technics. And that was my first opportunity to mix. But before that, I'd been watching DJs and I just worked out what they were doing.
Right.
So when I had the technology in front of me, I was like, I can do this, man. And it didn't take long for me to get it in, you know. It was like...
Okay.
It was pretty
But it's not
instant.
that hard, is it, really?
It's counting to 4 and literally, you know, splitting your ears. That's it.
That's the only thing I think, it's learning to hear two things and like independently.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's like, but it's not how hard, is it?
It honestly probably took me a week to master it. Not even. And maybe that's just, I had a skill for it. I don't know. Or maybe it's just not that complicated, you know? So
Bit of both,
either
maybe,
or,
you know?
I don't know.
Both
But
things
I'd
can be
seen
true.
so many people doing it up to that point that I, between that period of say like, I don't know, 93, possibly when did I graduate? 94. So maybe around then, 94 till 96, the end of 96 when I moved to Hong Kong. Well, actually middle of 96, I moved to Hong Kong. That period was a real obsessive time for watching people mixing.
Yeah, was
And
there
so
anyone in particular who...
Well,
Inspired
I have a night in my head, which is quite odd actually. Like when I was at that period, I was working as a music journalist, and I worked for a magazine, and it was like Billboard, but it was for Asia. That's how I ended up in Asia. And there used to be a music conference called Midem that used to happen every January in the south of France, where all the industry, when I say industry, I mean like the people who run the record companies, which in those days were, you know, lots of money. They had loads of money, so they could have these huge conventions.
In the days where proper parties actually happened.
Yeah, they were like, but also the most random things would happen. So I saw Jeff Mills play in the Palais de Festival in Cannes, which is where they do the film festival. Huge ballroom, ballroom filled with seats. Like in another room, there was something else going on, and in another room, something else, and the most random things. And I stumbled across that during that week, Jeff Mills, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I didn't understand. I think maybe I'd heard of him, but I didn't know much about it.
And he was just playing his normal set.
And he was doing his normal set to like business people who were like probably been drinking all day, like, you know, had as many salad-niçoise during their day or whatever, loads of champagne, killing their company budget, God knows what else. So. And for me, I was just like, this is madness. And then maybe 6 months later,
Were people dancing?
some were.
Okay.
There were definitely some punters there.
Right.
But it wasn't like the lights were on, you know? That's why it was so astonishing for me, because I could see. But he was up on a huge stage.
Right.
It was almost like he was about to deliver a speech at a wedding. It was like, I remember there being like curtains and
the podium.
ballroom. Yeah, it was the buffet probably down one side or something. Yeah, it was really random. But for me, that
really
was
good buffet
a
as well,
super transformative period, because the only DJs I'd ever really listened to were soul and jazz DJs, and in those clubs actually you couldn't ever see the DJ.
Right.
So it's definitely like you went there to dance, you know, like you weren't looking for the DJ when you went out. So that was a real transformative thing. And then a few months later was when I moved to Asia. Jeff Mills was playing again, and there was a night, I think they had this X-Mix series. They were doing a launch, and it was Derek May, Fumiya Tanaka, Ken Ishii, and I think Jeff Mills as well in Hong Kong. Again, there was a Midem Asia. It was actually Midem Asia, which it didn't last very long. And again, then the clubs were much smaller, and I could see what was going on. And by that stage, I was like, wow, what's going on? You know.
What years were you in Hong Kong?
96 to 99.
Over the handover period.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
must have
over
been
the handover.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, nothing literally happened.
Right.
You didn't know, you know, nothing.
Yeah, we didn't roll the
spoke-
tanks in.
Yeah, that was it. We were all waiting for the next day, like waking up or whatever.
Right.
Like,
Because
it was a 3-day party, basically. I remember that. And it pissed it down with rain. And I just went to party after party after party after party that weekend, because it was just this huge long holiday. But then after it, we were all waiting for something to happen, and nothing happened. You know?
And it took another 20 years for them to actually do anything.
Basically.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Bit by piece by piece. But,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
I mean, I just came back from Hong Kong, and for me, it just felt the same.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, if you live there, I'm sure it's different. But I have friends who have been there since I was there, who still live there, and they all came out to my gig, kind of thing. So things didn't really feel much different.
Right.
But yeah, it was an interesting time to be at somewhere where history was literally taking place.
Right, yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I remember watching the bit when I think Chris Patton and Prince Charles got on the QET or whatever, and we were all just still there, kind of like
they got on the boat and sort of sailed away, said, "I'll see you later."
Bye, England's gone. But we were all like, "Yeah, let's go to a party," and then went to some party.
Wow,
so, it was pretty mad. Yeah, that was and so Hong Kong for me was learning to mix and discovering DJing, and that was my time for all of that, and then immediately going, I'm doing this.
Right.
I'm going to do this.
So the scene in Hong Kong was pretty vibrant. I mean, I remember reading about, like in Mixmag would cover sort of those sorts of scenes a little bit, and just reading about it, wow, that must be amazing. But obviously they were a few years behind.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I missed the start of kind of the rave scene there, if you like, but not by much. You know, it kind of, I think what happened was, at that point, Hong Kong was such that you never needed a visa to go there because it was a British territory. Yeah. So what would happen is you would have backpackers would go on their round the world trip. They would run out of money and they would go to Hong Kong to get a bar job or something to earn some money to carry on their travels. Right. And then they just didn't leave because it was so much fun there. So you'd have all these people who were like, oh yeah, I was on my way to Australia and never made it, you know, and they would just be or they'd come back and do the same thing. They were like, oh, we loved it on the way here. We only had a few days. We're going to stop. So there were loads of people there, my age, in their 20s at the time, who we just had like shitty jobs and you could live there pretty cheaply. And that was the party scene. And so those people, my age or a little bit older, they were probably the same as me. They just missed the very beginning of Acid House, or they just had a bit of it maybe. And by the time they got early 90s to Hong Kong, they were like, we need to recreate this scene. And so that's kind of what happened, you know. Even like the local DJs there that I knew of, some of them had been to England for their schooling or university and come back and started DJing in Hong Kong. So by the time I got there, it had been going for about 5 years and really was peaking. You know, if you imagine UK in 93, 94, it was the same there. Hong Kong, 95, 96, 97.
What were the key clubs at the time, or venues or whatever?
Well, there wasn't really a club. That was the thing. It was mainly, they were doing events. There were big events, but there was an after hours scene. So you'd have big parties where at places like Bar City and Jimmy's Sports Bar, which was in the Hong Kong Stadium, like a big, just looked over the Hong Kong Stadium as a big bar. There was like the place called the Go Down, which was underneath a hotel in the middle of Central. There was venues and people would then do a party there, but it wasn't like every week you go to this club. That didn't exist. But an after hours scene began to spring up around 93, 94, I think. And what happened, you'd have these bars in Wan Chai, which is like the place where all the girly bars, where you'd get the horrible grey old men trying to pick up their Filipino mates or Thai maids or whatever. And that would be the place that they went. And you had a lot of those kind of bars, which were not really a strip club, but they were a bit fruity, you know. Those places would close, or I don't know how. I still don't know how it actually began, but they would close at 3 or 4, and then some local DJs were like, "Well, can you stay open longer?" Because Hong Kong for me is the only 24-hour city in the world. It definitely was then. You could do whatever you want any time of day or night. And so they would start these parties.
And was that, sorry if I can interrupt you, was that legal? Was it just a case of just like...
No idea. I think I mean, who knows?
Semi-legal.
I think it was legal. I think that they don't have licensing hours in Hong Kong, so why would you...
Right, well, if,
it wouldn't be legal. So, and you would get... And at that time, so you had the kind of energy of those kind of already seasoned clubbers from the UK, and specifically UK, you know, specifically a lot of Brits, because and also at that time they were building the convention centre. You had a lot of builders from the UK there earning a shitload of money, so you had a lot of them geezers in the party. So they were building the airport, they were building the convention centre, 2 massive construction things. So you had a lot of people, again predominantly British blokes there, and you had the army were there as well, you know, that was still stationed there. There's a lot of geezers in Hong Kong. But anyway, so you had these parties started that would go from 4 till midday.
Right.
Midday they would shut, and whatever party had been going on around the island or in Kowloon, everybody would end up in the same after hours. Right. So by 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. for sure, everybody you knew in Hong Kong would be at one of these after hours every week.
Right.
And they went every week.
Nice.
So I learned a lot about partying in those places as well. That was my...
And what music was getting played?
Terrible music.
Okay.
Terrible, like... It wasn't... When I think back to it, I had a great time, but when I think of the tunes, I was like, I was dancing to that? You know, like...
What?
I don't know. What?
Give me an example. A terrible tune.
Well, I don't know. Just like very kind of pumping, kind of Meet Her at the Love Parade kind of stuff, or, you know, Camisra... Let me show you.
The stuff that people like again these days, basically.
Yeah, exactly, which worries me. But also things like Todd Terry, Something's Going On, you know, that kind of thing. Just big tunes.
Yeah, big 90s.
There was a lot of big tunes. I remember this one track, Joyride, with a big bass line in it, which I used to love. It's probably some Dutch house tune or something like that. So like big tunes of the 90s when you had those big E tunes, you know, like full of rushes and those kind of things. So nothing spectacularly underground, but every DJ had their thing that they played. So like Lee Burridge was massive then, and he was playing a lot of prog.
Okay.
That's where he started. So he was playing a lot of prog. You had another guy, Christian, he liked to play breaks. You know, Joel I, he was a bit more kind of house techno, deeper sort of stuff. So they all had their own take. They would all play the big tunes, but then they also had their own sound as well. So, yeah, so I heard a lot of stuff. But at that point, I was into, when I just started really buying records for mixing, I was really deep housey then. I'd just come from a kind of, for 2 or 3 years of being really into psytrance and going, you know.
I wanted to ask about psytrance.
Yeah.
I
got into
went
deep
to
house.
loads of psytrance, like, because you went to, you were talking about early go parties, kind of thing. And this is almost certainly bullshit, but when I've seen pictures before, I was like, I'm sure I know that person. And the only thing it can be is from early go parties. Because
I used to go Pendragon.
Yeah, and Return to the Source and
Return to the Source. I never went to Samsara. Okay. I don't think, but I used to go to this place called the Imperial Gardens in Camberwell. Yeah. And they would have like psytrance in one room and then deep house in the other room. Right. So that for me, that was like basically that's what I play now. Psytrance and deep house. Okay. So, but yeah, I did used to go to those, and
that was previous to going to Hong Kong.
That was literally the time that I was going. I was buying records in Chocky's Tunes in Soho, Soho's Court, and I would go to those parties. And and I had a friend, and her boyfriend at the time was in the Platypus label, and he was really good friends with them, DJing for them. So any party that they would put on, either private party, private parties, or kind of warehouse parties, or I remember they did a night of Subterrane in Acklam Road once, and just those kind of things. I would go because I was in that crew of people. They weren't my friends, but they were the friends of my friends, so I would go. Yeah. So yeah, but then it was exactly in that period that I went to Hong Kong. Right. So that was like 96. I went. Okay. So, and then but when I actually first went to Singapore, that was the first place I landed. I was going to go to Hong Kong, but I liked Singapore, so I went there first, and I stayed there for a few months. And the first people I met were a crew who were really into psytrance, who owned a shop called Triptych Records, and they were amazingly French and Singaporean. And through them, I was really into it. I got really obsessed with it. And then I don't know what happened. Then I moved to Hong Kong, and it wasn't big there. Right. And I think I went. I don't know. It's around the time that I kind of discovered really lots and lots of deep house, and then I just kind of went, I've kind of heard this now, and stopped completely. I mean,
psytrance is a very specific thing,
and it was of a time, you know.
Right. I totally agree with you. Yeah. I mean, it was great. I mean, the parties were awesome. Like the atmosphere of the parties was just
amazing. Yeah. But I was never like into wearing all the clothes.
No, God, no.
But I just
some questionable fashion choices were made at those parties.
But a lot of those early parties were never pure psytrance either. That I remember, they had a lot of acid techno things were going on, a lot of crossover, you know, with that sound. And when I got to Asia, it was much more purist. I wasn't hearing the techno. I was just hearing the psytrance. So I think, especially like Return to the Source and that, I don't remember it ever being pure psytrance. There was always like Oberon, Mark Sinclair, those guys. They were not just playing psytrance. They were playing acid techno as well and stuff. So there was definitely a mix. But when I got to Singapore, it was pure psytrance. So I think that's why I kind of was like, no, now I've kind of heard it. Yeah. And also it was kind of the end of it being good. Yes. Like 97, by that time it started to drop. 98, it was dropping off a little bit.
But it just became basically a cliche, didn't it? It was just like the same thing as genres sometimes do, to be fair. But so So that was where you first started playing out regularly?
Yeah. I was playing out in Hong Kong, playing for small parties, playing for...
learning to mix, actually. That's how we got to this point. Yeah, you were saying, like, okay.
Yeah, and then when I left Hong Kong, because I left because of visa, basically. I was either like, I can stay here now on the visa that I've got, or you could keep leaving. You could go to Macau or somewhere, I don't know, Taiwan, and come back in and get a re-stamp on your passport for another 6 months. But it wasn't official. It was always a tourist visa. So I was like, I'm going to have to get a proper job. And I'd only ever freelance there. And I was like, I don't want to get a job here now. Right. What's available to me? You know, there was very few.
So what have you been doing? You've been working for that magazine? Is that what you said?
No, I started there, and then actually that magazine collapsed. And just before I went, because of those kind of industry conventions I mentioned, I knew some other journalists from Music Week, and they were like, well, we have this other magazine, Music Business International. If you go to Asia, do you want to run the bureau there? So that was like, all right. So they paid me a retainer, a couple of £100 or £300 a month, just to check out what stories were there, or if they wanted a story written, I would be there to write it. Okay. You know. So I started stringing for those, and I kept doing that the whole time I was there. And then I got some freelance jobs working for magazines in Hong Kong, and then I was DJing. That's when I started DJing. But to be honest, I was partying so hard then. It was like very hard for me to keep a job down anyway. So it was really an adventure time for me. So, and then I came back, and I think I was unemployed for a whole year, and I was just started to freelance in the UK around around 99, and then I got a job, my first proper full-on journalism job back in the UK, and
music journalism.
No, that was working for. They relaunched a magazine from the 60s called Nova, around 2000, and I worked on that for a few years at IPC. So that was my first, and I was a news editor there. So it was all the new stuff. So new fashion, new music, new TV, new whatever. So, right. But yeah, that's how I kind of came back and started doing journalism in the UK,
right?
And DJing. And I started as soon as I got back. I played for a couple of people I knew from Hong Kong, and then I was going out to. That's when my friends here were all going to the End, and I used to go to the End before I left. So they were all going to Subterrane on a Saturday, and our friends were DJing there, were like the residents in the lounge and stuff. So we used to go Subterrane, and then from that I started to go to Wiggle and going to Whoop Whoop and all these kind of tech house parties that were going on there.
Okay, I remember those too.
The late 99s, and so that was my thing. That's when then I was like, I'm going to start my own party, and that's when I did. I started.
And that was Peg.
Yeah, that's when I started Peg.
Right.
So I was just like, because my music was because I came from the deep house thing rather than the tech house thing, and for me, I used to love those parties. Again, I used to love the vibe, but I wasn't 100% with the music all the time. It got a bit blokey for me. A bit repetitive and a bit blokey, a bit simplified. And I think when they started, they were much more complicated, the music-wise, a bit more different scenes all making this one sound. But around that time, it started to get... People actually made tech house records before they... It didn't exist before, you know?
Yeah, right. Before it became... Well, before it did a similar thing to what Psytrance did, unfortunately.
Exactly. But I think when that happened, I was still more on the deep side, like Glasgow Underground, DIY, those kind of paper, that kind of sound. So...
Right.
I started my own party.
I mean, I've definitely seen you at parties before. That's definitely the reason why I found you. Yeah. Yes. Let me ask you about putting on parties, generally speaking.
Yes.
I was going to go on this when we talk about the underground thing. Because obviously, so Peg and then Night Moves is the other one.
Yeah, I mean, I did Peg 99 to 2009.
Yeah. I actually listened to your set from the 10th birthday.
Oh my God.
It's good. It's
old. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that was it. And then I canned it. I was like, I've had enough now. 10 years is enough.
What venues did you do Peg at?
Oh, many.
Yeah, okay.
I did. They were always illegal ones. So I got into doing things that... I worked out that if I did them at recording studios, you would always have a sound engineer and good sound.
Okay, that's a good tip.
I got massively into doing...
Tip.
I used to do the Premises, which was 3 rooms, actually. So I used to do the Premises in Hackney Road, the Fortress Studios, which was amazing, actually. That was in just off Old Street.
Yeah.
Where else did we do Peg? Gosh. Apiary, which is a photography studio on Hackney Road. That's where I did the last one. And then we actually ended up doing Night Moves in that place as well, from the second one.
So I was going to say, I mean, a feature of this whole thing is that you don't use proper clubs, basically.
No.
And you, I suppose, try and transplant the vibe to different places. But obviously, the physical space is really key.
Yeah.
And in that conversation with Bill, you talk about you haven't done a night moves party basically because you can't find a good space to do it. So talk a bit about physical spaces.
I mean,
and parties.
Jade and I.
Well, let me ask you though, why? What's bad about clubs? Is it just because
you don't
too
control
obvious?
the door at a club?
Oh, okay.
You don't get to say who comes and goes, which for me that's non-negotiable.
Okay.
I want to be in charge of my own door, so that's the number one reason.
How much of a door policy have you tended to run?
Well, we haven't really needed to do it too much because generally we were doing when we really were doing night moves. When we started doing night moves, so 2012, we were only selling to our friends, and at that point, none of the things like Instagram hadn't happened, and RA hadn't really happened as a ticket place. So we were selling on RA, but at that point, nobody looked to find a DJ on the. These things just hadn't happened 12 years ago or 13 years ago, so they weren't available. So the way that we did things then is probably the way that we do them now, but just no one really knew about it. So we were selling tickets up front.
So this is back to the underground thing, which is the reason why I wanted to put it out in the first place. Yeah.
So we could do it, but when we started doing night moves, we were doing Apiary Studios in Hackney Road for a while. We didn't do any listings. It was like we just tell our mates really. So I really don't know how other people found out about that party. So it all started as friends, and then. And then we moved to Wembley.
What was that's the venue I want to ask you about. What was the capacity roughly when you first started doing the party?
About 150.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it was big. You could have got more into Apiary, but they had one room which was like their photo studio room, which was tiny, but that was the room for music because it was the only soundproof room.
Right.
Everything else had kind of hit the street, so people could hear it. So it had like an outside bit and another room which was a big bar at the back, but you couldn't put music in there because there were flats literally outside that door. So we didn't do it there. Then we moved to Wembley, and that came about because our sound guy, George, was storing his sound system stuff up at this big warehouse in Wembley. It was above a Porsche garage next to Wembley Stadium. So where Wembley Stadium is, you have the car parks and there's the whole like industrial thing. And the guy who ran it, he ran it with Erin, who used to be part of Sancho Panza and The Source and all of that. So these guys, they had a big history of parties, whatever, and they ran it as their own personal party space since 1986.
They had a massive F1 rig, didn't they, or something?
They had the F1 because they were really good friends with Tony from Function One.
Right. Yeah.
So it was installed in there the whole time. It was like 4 points, So the whole room was like Function One. So everything was like. We couldn't believe it when we found this place. We were like,
I mean,
this is like the dream.
To have missed out on these parties.
They were,
to be honest.
And you could go to whenever. Great. They went on for...
Right,
there was no... And there was... They had one guy who would go on the door, which was like their geezer, basically, who would just know for trouble. And then we had our guy inside, who was like some guy I know from... He's a friend of a mate from football kind of thing, It's like a proper geek, ICF guy kind of thing. Okay. So he was doing our door inside, and there was never. I think we threw out one person once who came with a girl. He was drunk and started misbehaving. He went, and I think that's the only time we've ever thrown anyone out of a night move. Oh, actually, I threw some boys out once with guns.
Okay.
That was in Hackney Wick in about 2006. We did a squat. A mate was living in a squat, so we did a party there. And these like boys all turned up to see what was going on. And they were literally like 21 or something. And somebody came up to me, running up to me at the party. Jane, someone's tooled up in here. I was like, what? So I was like, who's that? That's so disrespectful. So I just went and found them. And there was like one guy who was like the leader, and then it was one of his little footman kind of things was tooled up, and then another one was hassling girls in the toilets. And I just went up to this guy and had a go at him like his mum. And by the end of it, they were like, yeah, sorry me. So they all left. They were just probably seeing if anyone was selling pills or something,
right.
So, on their patch or whatever. And then they could see it was just this fluffy party,
Right.
And they legged it. And people were like, how did you do that? I was like, yeah, I used to have bigger balls in 2006, 20 years ago than I do now, probably. So it didn't bother me at the time. But they're the only times we've ever thrown anyone out of a peg. But yeah, So Night Moves was great in that venue, but eventually
how big was that venue?
You could have got 400 in there.
Okay.
We used to cap it at 330 because I had this thing where I used to hate being you know, squished up when I was going out. So we always used to cap it. Me and Jade would be looking at the tickets like, this has got too many. Yeah, should we stop it? Yeah, so we'd always stop it. And that was 2 floors. So downstairs you had like a smoking area, but it was sort of in a garage, so it was sort of seated, sofas everywhere. So
yeah, you were saying that the ability to sit down at a party is extremely important.
My gosh, the time. So it's always, I'm lazy, right? I want to sit down at a party, but what, like, you know, but this to me, and I played it in France at this new club SL recently, and they had sofas in there, and I was like, Bruce, I can't believe you've got sofas in a club. I was so happy, you know, to see some sofas. That's always been my thing. If you can't, whether you're gouging out, you know, like
Brees from
he used to run
Concrete.
Concrete, yeah,
Right.
their new club. So
I didn't realise they had a new thing.
yeah, they've got an amazing new spot in Paris, and yeah, they've got sofas in there. I was like, this is fantastic. Yeah, the fact that clubs don't have anywhere to sit down now, that's why I don't go out.
Right.
I can't sit down, and I've always wanted to sit down. You know,
the chill out room is an
not
important
even
thing.
though, not even a chill out room. Even like
Just,
Plastic People, you had the bench along the back wall kind of
Right.
thing. You could always chill. There's always somewhere to sit.
Yeah.
You know, so these are to me, it's integral. If you can't let people just chill for a minute, especially if they've been dancing on pills or something.
Yeah, right.
Let them have a sit down, you know, just for a bit. So that would always be my thing when I went out. It'd be like scoping out the place to see where I'd sit down later.
Right. Okay.
Lazy bitch.
Right. But places like that, by like the Wembley venue, I mean, are by their very nature few and far between.
Yeah, I mean,
and even more so now.
I have a venue. I did a party last year. First time I've done a party not in London for years, because I know a guy who is a woodworker, and he has a big space, and in this space he's kind of turned it into his own kind of party venue, and it's got a sound system in there, it's got places to chill, it's got a kitchen, it's got out the back he's got a sauna and a hot tub and a fire pit and all that. Yeah, he's a woodworker, so he can make all this stuff. But I did a party in there. That was the first time I'd done a party that felt like an old school party.
Right.
You know, I did it with 3 other DJ friends of mine, none of whom live in the UK, so they'd definitely never been to a party like that. And we didn't advertise it at all. We just did word of mouth and a secret ticket link so people could buy tickets. I think I did 1 post on social media about it. That was it. Just a story. And we tried to keep, and again, it was like 150 people. Tried to keep it as underground as possible. Secret, you know. And that was amazing. People were like, I had 25-year-olds there or 23-year-olds who'd come from like Manchester or Sheffield or whatever, and they were like, I've never been to a party like this. Didn't know this existed. So for me, I was like, yes, you know, we can still do it, and people still want it. But you can't shout about those things for it to happen.
Right.
So there's no way I'm gonna we'll do another one this year, but again, I'll probably just email everybody who came last year because I have all their contacts now, and say, do you want to come again?
Okay.
I'm not gonna advertise it, because as soon as people know, everybody wants to be part of it,
Right.
you know, and then it's like, then you have to think of bigger spaces and paying more money and all of this stuff.
Right.
Like, I felt bad charging money for that party, but I had 4 flights to pay for other people, so we had an accommodation to buy, so we had to do it. So it was, you know, it wasn't a moneymaker, but it was.
So it's like 300. That is the kind of the most that ever should be, you think?
I don't know.
That kind of thing.
I guess it depends on the space. Like, if you had a beautiful dance floor for 200-300 people, then you'd maybe want an outdoor space for 50 people to have a smoke, or 50 people to chill, you know, have a nice chill out. So you could have more, but I think at any one time on a dance floor, because you can't smoke on a dance floor now, anywhere, this is... you have to really understand what happens when people go to have a cigarette, you know, because people do that still, you know, or a spliff or whatever they're doing. You can't imagine they're all going to always be in the party. So when they're not there, they need to be somewhere nice, I think, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
You can't just be standing
It's
out
gotta
there.
be-
I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's the way of getting people back onto the dance floor faster.
Yeah, there is that too, yeah.
I mean, I have this thing where people, you know, there was maybe a couple of years ago, everybody was moaning, about me included, about, oh, there's no chill out rooms anymore. And then I really thought about that. And the chill out room, when I was going to places and it was a chill out room, that was where you went to skin up. Well, that's when you went for a sit down with your mates. And now you can't smoke indoors. So no one is going to skin up in another room. So the actual, you know, the concept of one of the reasons that filled a chill out room, it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So to have that room will be, if you can't smoke in there where you're sitting around,
Pointless,
it's going to be harder.
Absolutely.
And then people just chat, So
when the smoking ban came in, what were you doing at the time? You were doing peg, right?
yeah.
What did that what kind of effect did that have?
Good question. Well, I think actually we had so many illegal venues, it probably didn't matter.
Right.
But there
So
were
you
always
just-
places with a little courtyard or something.
Yeah.
And I think that happened, but I more remember how it affected clubs.
Right.
So I remember going to Fabric first, really soon after the smoking ban. And number one, it just stank because all
Yeah,
you
that
could
was
smell was
awful, wasn't it?
people's
Yeah,
sweat.
God, terrible.
That's all because
Farts.
people
Yeah.
were dancing then, amazing, were sweating and dancing. So
Right, exactly. I'm just
so
waving their
you
phones
could
around.
smell, you could smell the sweat. But yeah, that's all I remembered is like. But when I left there, I didn't smell myself. I didn't smell of smoke, So, but that's what I remember the most is the smell, not the amount, and also these big periods where people would just disappear from the club.
Yeah. Dance was just empty.
Everybody
Like,
was outside.
Yeah.
So I mean, now we're used to it, but there must. I would love to watch a sped up kind of, I don't know, like a security film of motion on a dance floor, just to see whether there's like periods of seas of people going to the smoking area or not.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I was in the sort of early dubstep scene at the time, and there's obviously smoking weed on the. I mean, obviously it's always a thing, but like particularly in that scene,
Yeah.
it was.
Killed it.
It did, absolutely did. Yeah, it had a really fundamental effect on things. In a very bad way, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I was also around the time I moved to Berlin, and obviously, Germany as a country just ignored that whole ban until quite recently, and even now you can, it's largely battered away administratively. But I mean, I think it had quite a significant effect on the British club scene generally.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the way that it had the effect, because it just created this void in a night, it obviously gave the DJ way more anxiety than they ever had, because they kept wondering why they were losing the floor. They didn't know why, and that lasted for a while. I think it created way more kind of headaches for people who had existing venues. What are we going to do with the smokers? So that was like a big thing.
Yeah.
And I think that also had a knock-on effect in terms of the fact that you're bringing people out in the middle of the night for a good 15 minutes to sit outside. Maybe they're on drugs, so they're going to chat more and louder, or they're drunk and they're going to chat louder. That had a big effect of alerting residents to what was going on,
Yeah, okay.
So
I'd never considered that before, but yeah,
because everybody was
right,
outside making a noise,
Right,
whereas
so-
before they were all contained inside. So I think, it had lots of negative knock-on effects. Health-wise, obviously not, but in terms of the way that a business ran, all these other things that you wouldn't.
Yeah, and
be thinking
just
about.
to flesh it out, the problems that small venues in particular have faced, and I think everywhere, but I think in the UK is that's a strong example of it, like has been at least partially driven by residents moaning about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's obviously other factors at play too, but absolutely, yeah. And it never really occurred to me that must have been significant, but absolutely, yeah, it must have been.
Yeah, suddenly there's all these people at 3 in the morning outside your house.
I mean, you would complain about that.
Well, they weren't there before. You know? But I mean,
Exactly.
I know in London there was I only found this out a few weeks ago that so this agents of change law thing where you move into a venue, where you move into a new development has been built next to an existing club, you can't complain about noise if you chose to live next to an existing club. So the license is protected. I only recently found out that is not enshrined in law. It's only a guideline.
Right.
And so you can, if you want to, if you've got the means, you can get that club closed down. Yeah. So it's not enforced, that law, unfortunately. Right. So even though they made a huge... I remember when it came in, because there was lots of things in Shoreditch that were getting closed, or people losing their licenses, maybe 15 years ago, and people were like, no, we've got this law now and they can't do it, But it isn't a law. It's actually just a guideline. So you can shut places down. It's just happened to the pickle factory. So
really?
that's never coming back because of exactly that reason.
Really? Because of resident complaints?
Well, the resident complaints in an area where there was nothing. It was just gasometer and a canal and warehouses. Now, all of that got, the gasometers are still there, but all the warehouses got knocked down, got turned into posh flats, and then somebody with a lot of money started complaining they didn't want a club outside their door, and now the pickle is just not.
That sucks.
It's not coming back for that
Absolutely.
reason. So yeah, that's another thing that's been closed down by noisy residents. So you do, if you're gonna, I don't know what the deal is with councils giving people licenses.
Right.
So I just heard last week that I live in Silvertown, which is East London, very, very East London, where nobody lives really. But Canning Town, which is like still my postcode. So Star Lane Pizza Bar just got a 24-hour license. So the councils are still, there's no residents there. There's literally nothing. There's a station and some, I don't know, like a builder's yard or something, that kind of thing. So there's no one to annoy at the moment in that area of London. And those businesses seem pretty established that they're not going to turn into flats yet. And I'm so happy just to see that a council would go, all right, you're not going to annoy anyone. You carry on. You do what you want. It's like, hallelujah. So, and that was, and Newham Council is not exactly known for being the most nightlife friendly council, but I was really happy just for them to be able to go, wow, you did it. You got a license, because no one can complain about it. So why would they turn you down? And the fact that they didn't turn them down for me is really
sure. Yeah. I mean, the small clubs thing, I think is, it's an issue just about everywhere. I think basically because everywhere's got the same kind of broad social and economic trends going on. Have you seen that reflected in the shows that you play, sort of in a kind of aggregate? Because obviously there's still there are still great clubs.
Yeah, I do still get invited to play small places, but it's now for me. It's just like, do I want to play in them? Because I did it for so many years. That was my territory. Was always tiny places, So. But yeah, I get, if you're running a small place, who are you going to book? Who can you afford to book? And should I be playing? So every year I say maybe I'll do 2 shows at a tiny place, and take a big cutting fee and just do it.
Okay, this is a thing which has been discussed before. So do you think that there is a moral obligation to do that?
Look, I've been doing this for 25, 30 years.
Sure.
I've played everywhere for no money.
Yeah,
so
right.
I'm not morally obligated to do it. Because I've done it for 20... I didn't get paid for 20 years. Why the hell should I not get paid now? I'm CEO of my own company, if you like. I'm in my 50s. I don't want to earn what I was earning at 20.
Yeah, you've done the yards, right? Done the hard yards.
Out of everybody I know who started when I started, and I'm still doing it, and there isn't many, if I've got an opportunity to earn more money, then why wouldn't I do that?
Sure.
But I don't need to. But I don't sell out to do it.
Right.
There's certain things that I just turn down because I'm like, I'm not playing at that. It doesn't make sense for me to play at that.
Okay.
So
but look at the DJs though in the whole. Do you think that there is a?
It depends where you come from. Like for me, that's
so
how
completely subjective.
I grew up playing in. Yeah, warehouses and recording studios, and also playing for sound systems. I used to play at a sound system in Kent on a beach, for free, or in the woods, or I'd go up to the Midlands and play a sound system in a field or something. So I played so many free parties and so this to me is part of who I am. So morally, for me, I have to still play those occasionally. I have to. That's why I did a party on my own with 3 friends, and the only money that we made went straight into paying for all their flights and everything, so with 100 odd people, how much money is that as a budget, so I don't have to earn money from a small club. I'll earn my money somewhere else.
Sure.
So I can do those parties, and I think yes, you should at least make some space to do something at least once or twice a year, because that club is going to have such a great night if you're popular, and you're going to fill their club for them. So yeah, I'm totally up for doing that. There's a couple of parties in London I'll play for literally nothing. There's an amazing party called Free Movements, and their budget is so tiny. In the end, I was just like, you keep the money. It's probably more important that you have the money than I do. I don't need to earn. I'd rather not earn anything, but you can spread it out more among your other DJs, kind of thing. It's like that. So I will still do it, but if people don't do it, maybe they never did it. For me, that's my history, and I did it. I know it inside out. Yeah. That's why I never have problems,
absolutely. So it's completely legitimate perspective, absolutely.
No, I do, but I think it's important as well. But I don't think I need to do. I don't think I need to. It's me choosing to do it.
Right.
Because I did it for so long. But yeah, to come back with a bigger profile and to be able to help kids or to help a small festival or help, yeah, I'm always going to do that because I'm connected to those people still, you know, I'm connected to that. So I will do it. But if you're, I don't know, if you're some massive DJ and you've never done it, why would you do it? It doesn't make any sense to you to do it.
Because you feel some kind of social responsibility towards...
Who really feels... I can't see any DJ out there showing me that they have social responsibility to anyone except their accountant.
That's probably fair.
But also, if you're from, I'm from the UK, and that's how the scene existed here. You know, that may be not the case if you're from Paris or you're from, I don't know, somewhere else that never had a squat scene or a small club scene or whatever. If you only had the Omen or something, what is it? It doesn't even make sense for you to do it because you don't even know what that is. You know, you don't.
Okay.
So yeah, I think there's, you know, everything is. I think it's good to do small things and to show people that you're there for the music, not for your ego. I think that's very, very important.
Sure.
I think that's important. But small clubs come with their own problems,
right?
You know, especially DIY clubs. So if I know that somebody's literally found a space, I'm like, I know this is going to be difficult, especially if they've got no history of setting up record decks and things like that.
Yeah.
For me,
toilets.
I don't want to be in a bad mood, you know. I don't want to come and be pissed off at something and then bring that mood into it. I'd rather just come and bring the best of myself and do a good show, kind of thing. So I don't. Sometimes I'll just say no because I think this is going to be a nightmare. But
which is a totally reasonable reason to say no.
But I still do them. You can catch me in a couple of places. You know, you can always, if you look hard, you'll find me in a couple of those places every year for sure.
Okay.
And I never stop. But where though? Yeah, that's the thing. Where do they?
Right. Yeah. Listen, push for time. There's an area that we haven't talked about that I wanted to cover, which is the dance press. The music press, generally speaking, the dance press is a special area of
I mean, I don't
interest.
think it exists anymore, does it really?
I mean, they do exist. Mix Mag exists, DJ Mag exists,
Yeah, actually,
RA is a thing.
You know what, that's a good point. I mean,
the institutions certainly exist. Whether anything of interest happens within them is a different matter.
Okay, well, that's interesting because I know Mixmag went through a terrible time. I didn't work for Mixmag, but I used to freelance for DJ, Ministry, Music, Sky, Scene.
What kind of stuff did you write for those features and
everything? Features, news stories, reviews, everything. I was doing them all. Specifically around the early 2000s, and then it got to about 2003, 2004, and I was, you know, they were paying very little per word. I was spending a lot of time doing a feature and and I couldn't even pay my rent. So I actually went to start working in record shops at the same time, and then I moved into kind of internet because that was like a boom for that. So I started doing internet for TV. So I did that for years.
Right.
But I know around that time, I mean, music, all the magazines collapsed, so they all disappeared. Update 7, Ministry, music. Mixmag kept going, but it went through a huge lull, and then it I think it got bought by this Development Hell, this company, and then it used to be EMAP. It used to be EMAP, and it got sold. So then it went completely independent, and then slowly, I guess, over the last, say, 14 years or where it's kind of come back to being a decent thing. But what I love about Mixmag now, actually, is they have these local versions. Right. So I just did an interview for Mixmag Asia and I read it and I was like, wow, there's no physical magazine, but the way that they were doing it, I thought that's really cool, the way that this can even exist now. So that's very exciting, I thought. But in terms of what's available now, there's not, you know, and again, it's that thing of what's people's relationship to print media. Who goes out and buy magazines? I buy magazines because I'm an old-fashioned person, but not everyone still subscribe, you know. But do people even do that anymore? Do they go to WH Smith and look at all the magazines and say, what am I going to buy? I don't think they do. They get their information online for pretty much everything. So people, I don't think they're going to journalism school and going into online writing. I just don't think that's what you do, you know?
If they are, then standards at journalism school have definitely declined.
Exactly, because the people working the people mainly that I read who are working off, maybe they're music fans, or maybe, and this was the thing I always used to hate about journalism, they just want to see their name in print, you know? That's why I stopped being a writer. and became an editor because I was just so sick of like byline people scuffling around for bylines. Right. I was like, this is not my world. And then I did all the background stuff for magazines for years, for a long time. I stopped putting my name on things. So when I see what's written now, I don't know. I go through stages. So at one point, I was really, really excited by Resident Advisor because they had journalists working there. Good journalists, Todd Burns, Will Lynch, Ryan Keeling, all these people they were editorial people.
Yeah.
And you could feel it. And as a journalist, that's why I could feel it. So the features in there had substance and they didn't seem to be pushing the journalist's narrative. They were always about the person, whereas now I don't see that.
Right.
And I see that to me, it feels like the intern's got control.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But I do see, I've noticed a few features that are conspicuous now in RA, where I can see that a journalist wrote them, but they're not many. They're not many, and the news stories are definitely all just copied and pasted from Twitter. That's why they're appalling.
Right, PR.
Or not even just
right.
nicked off somebody's Twitter feed or something, which is like, I'm sure if I'd have been a journalist and needed news stories back in 30 years ago and Twitter was around, I could have done it myself, but it wasn't the way you found stories. But now I don't know. I don't even look now because I know I'm going to get annoyed within the first paragraph by something that the journalist wrote, and it's probably about themselves.
Right, okay.
It's not about the person they're interviewing.
Yeah, right.
So that immediately I'll have got bored. So then the quality of journalism and the ability of journalists to maintain a critical aspect has disappeared.
Right.
You can feel like everyone's on a jolly now and they're kissing the arse of the PR or the label or whoever paid for their jolly,
Do you think there is space for proper journalism?
I would love to think so. I don't know. I wish I read more online, but I find I don't. I'm not going to read a feature online, so I just don't do it.
I've sort of felt like people writing now are handicapped due to the fact that everything is online, and just the experience of reading off a screen is just inherently inferior to reading a magazine. I mean, the reading of a magazine is actually one of life's great pleasures, isn't it? Really, yeah.
I mean, I still do it. I have a big pile of magazines next to my bed. It's something I do, but I'm not everybody, And actually, during the pandemic, that was one of the things I considered to do. When it started to drag, and I was like, okay, this world is over for me now. What am I going to do? I spoke with a friend of mine about starting a magazine, not one that was news driven, more of a kind of like a long form stories or whatever, and. I kind of regret that we never even got one issue off the ground, but things just didn't last as long as I thought they were going to last. But yeah, I was really, really keen to do it. I was really keen to. And then the last magazine of music that I was buying was that little record magazine, and I bought every one of those. But then they run out of money, and actually the format didn't change, and it got a bit repetitive, and the journalism inside was not journalism; it was literally a cut and paste of a Q&A. So. For me, I started to get annoyed by bad spellings and non-fact check things, and just all the things that I would look for. Yeah. But I would love to see that again. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting old now, so I can't tour as much. I don't want to tour as much as I was touring. And if I tour, even if I get to a point where I'm going to tour much less, then I will definitely start looking into doing something like that, because my heart is still in magazines, 100%. It's still something that I really, really care about, and the quality of journalism, the quality of how you present words on a page, all of that's really important to me. Sure. And it makes me sad that it's not important to other people.
I mean, to what extent do you think the absence of it has a negative effect on music, the music scene generally speaking?
I mean, this is something that you could drag out into a wider thing about media now, that people are distrustful of the media. Sure. But people are afraid to criticize. It's almost impossible to criticize anything now. You have to, even in school, you have to do it in a very positive way. Right. People aren't used to having the piss taken out of them anymore. Yeah. It's just like, even satire is dying. So I think. Yeah,
it's almost like when you criticize something, you put yourself on one side of a line or the other.
It's like no one's open to be criticised. So, and one of the beauty If you grew up when I grew up in the 80s and 90s reading Enemy or music or mixed metal or any of those things, everybody had their tongue firmly in their cheek. You know, there was a lot of things going, you're in something ridiculous, let's take the piss out of it. Even the fact they used to have a column in Mixmag of Cana of the month,
right? Yeah,
and stuff like that. You know, people would happily get the piss taken out of them. Now people would have a meltdown. People would have a meltdown if you started to pick up things about them, or they wouldn't know how to cope with it. You know, of having the piss taken out of them. So, in a way, that was the beauty of it, because you had people who loved music, who were totally invested in the scene, going out every week. Writing about something that they loved with knowledge, who probably were a graduate from journalism school, and they could be funny. Where is that? You haven't got an opportunity to do that anymore. There's nowhere to do that.
Yeah, I mean, like, especially since Vice went downhill, because Vice was a bit of a kind of Marmite kind of a thing, but they absolutely had that kind of...
Yeah, they nailed the humour.
Yeah, aspect. They had a kind of like house style, which was very kind of irreverent and kind of like...
I don't think they were knowledgeable enough for some of the things they talked about, for sure. But in terms of, being sort of like youthy, fun media...
Right, yeah.
They got that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that worked.
Yeah.
And they worked on a worldwide level. But this is another thing. When we talked earlier on about globalization, I mean, media has become globalized as well. And what we think is funny is not going to translate in America. You know, they will be massively offended by us taking the piss out of something in UK. So it's because your audience is now global. You're always considering the needs of the global audience. And what's the need of a magazine reader in France and the magazine reader in Spain and the one in America? You know, they're completely different. Totally. So it's almost, you have to be all things to all people, and that's just led to blandness, I think, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a bad note to end on, isn't it?
Bring back mags, bring back magazines, bring back magazines.
Totally. So we didn't get back to Italy, but just to finish off, tell me some good Italian early progressive house records.
Oh my god!
People could look up.
I don't know. Well, the entire back catalogue of Interactive Test, which has pretty much been rinsed in terms of reissues now, so you can find those records. You can find those records easily. Okay. I don't know. Look on labels, those old labels, which were house, and then they got a bit more progressive, like DFC and Out, which had millions of other labels, or Disco Magic, which was a distributor, had millions of other labels. You can find little small labels like Area. Who else? Noise from the West. The West was a club in Tuscany, an after hours club. They had a label. I don't know. Get Digging is my...
Nice.
It's my gatekeeping answer to that.
Get digging, everyone. Jane, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Great. Thanks for being nice.
That's what I try and do.
Not giving me anything horrible to
confound expectations and be nice.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.